Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I normally don't preach with PowerPoint. I have this generational thing in which I say that this is my PowerPoint. The power is in pointing to the Word. And usually when I try to get into electronics, something goes wrong. So if something goes wrong, it's just because it always goes wrong with me. But maybe God will intervene this time and help me to go through it without any problems. You see the title, The Davidson Affair. You do know my name, right? Davidson. This is not the time when I'm coming out of the closet to tell you about my affair that I had. So if you think that's why I chose the title, you're wrong. I stand before God, I have not had an affair, except for the love affair with my wife. But I actually came across this title. When I first became a pastor, there was this book that someone gave me called The Davidson Affair. And this was in the days before the word affair has the connotation that it has now. And it was a novel about a newspaper man who was covering the story of one called Jesus, the son of David. And he tells the story as if he's a newspaper reporting describing the death of Christ. It's a great read. The Davidson Affair. And unfortunately, I had a fire at my house a few years ago, and it burned 1,000 books in my basement. And one of them was my precious book, The Davidson Affair. And I told the story a few months ago, and someone sent me another copy of The Davidson Affair. So I have it again, I'm thankful to say. My wife and I do Sabbath seminars. A lot of times we do the Great Sabbath Welcome, where we go back and we taste what it's like for our Jewish brothers and sisters, even in Jesus' day, to welcome the Sabbath. And one of the customs that our Hebrew brothers and sisters do, the observant Jews, is that the husband blesses his wife by reading from the Song of Solomon, or from Proverbs 31. And then the wife blesses her husband by reading from Psalm 112. And for a number of our seminars, Joanne was reading this to me. And I didn't have the heart to tell her that, she was reading from the New King James Version. And she got to this verse. She's blessing me, okay, in front of all these people, and the verse says, he will guide his affairs with discretion. and she didn't get it, and finally I said, Joanne, I think you'd better change to another version, because I don't really want God to guide my affairs with discretion. So the New King James was written before this word had its little moral shift in its meaning. So I'm playing on the name tonight, Davidson, with Jesus, the son of David. And I'm also playing on the name of my very favorite biblical author. Could you guess who my favorite Bible writer is?
David.
Well, what's my name again? Who was David's son? Solomon, right? And so my favorite book is the Song of Solomon. I love the Song of Solomon. I'm writing the commentary on the Song of Solomon for the New Adventist Bible Commentary, and I've just been enjoying it. I've taken 2 classes of seminary students through the entire book in Hebrew. We read every word in Hebrew poetry. And they say it's the most exciting book they've ever read. Imagine studying sex in Hebrew. That's what we get to do. It's awesome. Hebrew's great, the heavenly language, and sex, well, it's great too. And you put the 2 together, and it becomes wonderful. So, all right, so you can see where we're going tonight. No, we're not actually going there. But I do want to tell you a little bit about my appreciation for these 2 biblical characters, David and David's son. So the rest of the talk, you'll see on the top, you'll see a / David / son. And we're going to talk about Solomon and David tonight, just for a few minutes. And I want to set straight, first of all, a few misunderstandings about Solomon, David's son. David's son, right? talking about Shlomo, Solomon. And I have to say that I grew up with the stereotype about that man, Solomon, as a great philanderer, who from the very moment that he started getting interested in women, he started adding one after another until very early in his life he was already a moral jerk. And he ended up with 700 wives and 300 concubines, and you know the rest of the story. My wife also was raised with that stereotype. But he was also, at the other end of his life, the wisest man that ever lived, right? And so, when we were thinking of having our first child, and thinking of a name, I think we had already decided to have the first child, and the child was in my wife's womb, and we were trying to think of a name. And so I suggested the name Solomon. I said, wouldn't that be cool? My name is Davidson. So a name Solomon, David's son, would fit nice. And my wife said, no way, we're not going to have that polygamist jerk be given that name. So she nixed the idea in the bud. There was not even a moment to discuss. So that got me studying. Is it really true what we say about Solomon? And I found out some interesting things. I just want to set the record straight on Solomon. Now, I can't explain away his 1,000 wives and concubines. I mean, I'm not trying to lessen his guilt, okay? But what I want to share is this. Did Solomon start his life of affairs, extramarital affairs, and polygamous activity right as soon as he became king? And if you look at the evidence, the answer is no. You find in 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1, that now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. By the way, I'm using the screen because I'm going to be reading some texts. And in case you didn't bring your Bible, we're going to be looking at some texts, and I just want to put them up there so everyone can have access. And he married Pharaoh's daughter, and he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house, and the house of the Lord, and the wall all around Jerusalem. Ellen White adds the detail that this Pharaoh's daughter became a worshiper of Yahweh, became a true follower of God. And you keep on reading. You go to 1 Kings 7, and it says, in the house where he dwelt had another court inside the hall of like the workmanship. Also, Solomon also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken as wife. So now as he's building God's house, he spends 7 years doing this, he's planning a house for her, too. And then you go to the next text, 1 Kings 9:10. Now it happened at the end of 20 years, when Solomon had built the two houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house. So now 20 years has gone by. He's built God's house for 7 years. Then he spent 13 years building his house and his wife's house, Pharaoh's daughter. And then 1 Kings 9:24, so Pharaoh's daughter came up from the city of David to her house, which Solomon had built for her. This is 20 years later. So for the first at least 20 years of David's life, he was a monogamist. He was faithful to God. In 2 Chronicles 8:11, now Solomon brought the daughter of Pharaoh up from the city of David to the house he had built for her. For he said, my wife shall not dwell in the house of the king of David, because the places to which the ark has come are holy. He keeps saying, my wife, my wife, my wife, his one and only, his wife of his youth. David retained his wisdom, and he wrote all about this for over 20 years. I believe it was during this time that I'm going to skip that slide for a minute, that during this time that Solomon wrote. Solomon wrote Proverbs and the Song of Solomon in his early years while he was still faithful, while he still had his head about him, while he was still following God's will, before he fell into his polygamous affairs. And there's strong evidence in the Song of Songs. I can't get into the Song of Songs or it'll be another whole sermon, but there's at least a dozen lines of evidence that Solomon and Shulamit were married as monogamous partners, equal partners, without anyone else interrupting the exclusivity of their love relationship. And so the Song of Songs is giving us God's plan for what God intended marriage to be like. And Solomon lived that ideal until he got older. I suspect maybe as part of his midlife crisis. I don't know what it was that caused it to happen, but the text tells us here in 1 Kings 11, but King Solomon also loved many foreign women as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites and Ammonites and Edomites and Sidonians and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they shall with you. Why was he getting these wives from these other nations? Because it was the custom in those days, if you're a king, you enter into political alliances with other nations so that you will have peace relationships. When you entered into a relationship with another nation, part of the political deal was you get a wife out of that. And so David, here the compromise started when they asked for a king. And so now Solomon starts acting like a king. And he takes the bargain when he enters into these peace relationships, and he gets hooked on it, and he makes all these relationships, and out of those come many political things, and that's why all these other nations are mentioned. And it says he has 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart. For it was so when Solomon was what? Was old, that his wife turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God. That's what the heart of his father David. Lesson from this, we're never safe from Satan's temptations. I don't care if you're 1 year away from retirement. I don't care if you are retired. We still have the old man, the new man. And the old man can creep up if we don't find the power in God to resist. And so we are only one day and one prayer away from falling like Solomon did. And God longs to keep us strong. He longs to keep us pure. And unfortunately, Solomon didn't follow his own advice. But before we get to the end of our talk tonight, I want to share with you some of his advice. I've been gathering the wise advice of Solomon and David regarding men, regarding the challenges we have to face to keep our lives full of moral integrity. But we'll get there in just a few minutes. And then Ecclesiastes was written after he was an old man, an old man, after he had realized how he had fallen away. He had slipped away imperceptibly, and he comes to his senses, and he realizes, man, the years that I've wasted. And he comes back to God, and he writes about his folly, about his life of vanity that he had experienced away from God. So all three of his books are awesome, but my favorite is the Song of Solomon. Another affair that I want to look at, and I want to set the record straight here on something I think we have a misconception about. David had an affair. We read about it in Psalm 51 and verse 1. In the superscription of this psalm, it says, after David had gone in unto Bathsheba. And then Nathan the prophet had come to him. You are the man. And he woke up and he wrote this great psalm of repentance. The actual experience with Bathsheba is found in 2 Samuel 11. And I want to ask the question here tonight, just for a few minutes, before we get into the summary of the wise counsel David and Solomon had for us. What happened between David and Bathsheba? I remember, I'm going to try to set my Bible here and see if I can keep this up. Unfortunately, it's not quite cooperating with all this weight. So I'm going to try something else. Let's try, see if I can move clear out here. And I can put my Bible here. And when I need it, I'll grab it. Okay. So what happened between David and Bathsheba? I was visiting in Israel with a group of students, and we were standing on the very spot on the city of David where David's palace probably was. Now, since that time, they have actually discovered David's palace right there on that very spot, at the top of the Ophel, which is that structure that they built so that the wall wouldn't cave in, like a retaining wall. And on top of that retaining wall, in the city of David, they found the remains of that structure that was David's palace. And today they've reconstructed it so you can walk right up there and you can stand on top of, virtually on top of the same place where David stood. And according to the text, he looked down, and from that comes the sexual relationship with Bathsheba. I was standing there, and I had, 4 or 5 seminary students with me. And all with one chorus, they said, "Man, isn't it too bad that Bathsheba was flirting in the nude, trying to seduce David. Isn't it too bad that Bathsheba had that evil, temptress attitude and David had to fall for it?" And as I heard them speak, I tried to suggest, "Are you sure it's that way?" "Oh yeah, we know it's that way." So I said to myself when I got back home, I said, I think it's time I dig into 2 Samuel 11 and see what really did happen. Are there any clues there with what happened? So we're going to do a little inductive Bible study for a few minutes, okay? And I've got the question. The question for us is, who's to blame? Does the text tell us? What was going on there? What can we learn for today as men? So here's the text. Well, first we got to see the structure. 1 Samuel has a beautiful chiastic structure. It's the story of Saul. And the first half of 1 Samuel is Saul's rise to power, all the way up to the middle of Samuel. And when you get to chapter 15, he disobeys God. He fails to destroy the Amalekites. And he sacrifices when God tells him not to sacrifice. He really messes up and he refuses to listen to God's counsel. And from that central chapter, the rest of the story of 1 Samuel is downhill for Saul. His rise, his moral choice, which meant his downfall. Then you get to 2 Samuel, and it's the rise of David and his magnanimity and his rectitude and his integrity and his justice. And then you get to chapter 11 and 12 with Bathsheba and David. And then the rest of the book is downhill. He's lost his moral authority. And his sons won't listen to him, and his kingdom won't listen to him. So the first half is rise to power, then the moral failure in the middle, and then there's the decline. That's the structure of this book. Now in light of that, in the light of the fact that it's put right there in the middle, let's just think about what happened. So here's the text, and let's just read it together. Can you see it? Read it with me, okay? Come on, let's read it. At the turn of the year, the season when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel with him, and they devastated Ammon and besieged Rabbah. David remained in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, David rose from his couch and strolled on the roof of the royal palace, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And the king sent someone to make inquiries about the woman. He reported, "She is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, and wife of Uriah the Hittite." David sent messengers to fetch her. She came to him, and he lay with her. She had just purified herself after her period, and she went back home. This is a translation, the New Jewish Bible translation from that our Hebrew scholars have produced, our Jewish Hebrew scholars. I think it's got, in many places, the most accurate translation. We'll see that in a minute. So, here we go. What was the setting? What time of year? Okay, spring of the year. We saw it says, some versions actually say it happened in the spring of the year. And what was that time? What was supposed to happen at that time? Kings go out to battle. Why would they go in the spring? That's right. The weather's more appropriate for battle. There's not all the slogging through the mud of the wintertime. There's the crops that are coming up that are ripe so that they can just get grain as they're going along. Many reasons why they fought in the springtime. But did you notice the word in the spring when kings go out to battle? Catch that. Kings go out to battle. And then notice what else it says. Springtime. But where's the king in the battle? He stayed home. There's this long sentence. Now is the time of the year when the kings go out to battle. David sent Joab. This is the first time. David is always out there leading the battle. And now he's not in the battle. In fact, who all has he sent out there? Listen to the story. Listen to the narrator. He sent out Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. Now, probably that doesn't mean that everyone went out, but that's what it says. It's as if he empties the palace and everyone's gone. Except for who? The king. And when you read it in Hebrew, it's shocking because it's this long sentence and then 3 words. And David remained in Jerusalem. He's supposed to be out in the springtime with the kings in battle, but he's at home. Is that already alerting you something may be wrong here? That instead of exerting himself to be out there in battle, he's sort of I'll just take it easy this time. I'll just sort of kick back and enjoy my kingdom, and Joab can take care of it, and I'll just relax. Is that a danger sign? When you start feeling like you can relax, don't have to fight the battle, you just sort of relax. All Israel had gone to battle, but David remained in Jerusalem. Now, let's think of topography. And from the roof of his palace, he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. If you stand, and if anybody been to Israel? Anybody here been to Israel? Okay, I see some hands. And if you've been to the spot where the city of David is, you stand on that spot, which is about probably the level right now where they've reconstructed it as the rooftop, and you look straight down, and there's the little town of Silwan, and you can see the houses with their courtyards. They have walls around the courtyards, but they're not roofed, and you can look right in. It's not that someone is trying to display their sexual flags. It is that they are having their privacy invaded from above. Because the topography tells you David was right above where his citizens were. And so it says that he looks down over the courtyards below. And how do we know that Bathsheba lived below? Because the story about Uriah, a few verses later, after David is found out and he needs to get rid of Uriah, he tells Uriah 5 times, why don't you go down to your house? Go down to your house. Go down to your wife. Go down to your wife. 5 times. Uriah doesn't do it. I'm still not sure whether Uriah knew what was up or not. I don't know. I haven't figured that one out yet. If you got any insights, let me know. But that's another story. Then you have to know about the house. In Israel's time, it was the 4-room house. That means the 3 parts were covered. There was one part that was just 1 floor, and then there was another part that was 2 floors, and then there was the main courtyard. It was all walled in, but this one part, the courtyard, didn't have any roof. That's where they did their cooking. That's where they did their bathing. And people that were on the same level couldn't see. That's why they had a rule. And the rule is still there in the Middle East today. You don't go on the roof at sunset. Because that's when the family takes their bath. That's a unwritten rule of etiquette in the Middle East. But when I first went there the first time, I didn't know about. I happened to go on a roof over in Arab Jerusalem. at sunset. And I had Arabs shouting at me, "Get off the roof! This is sunset! Our wives are taking our baths at sunset! Don't ever go there again or you're going to be in big trouble!" I learned what David was breaking. David got up, and that's the next thing. What time of day was it? When evening came, it says. Now in the Hebrew, it's to the time of evening, which means right about this time of night. What's he doing in bed at this time of night? And he gets up to stroll around, so he'll be up there when the sun goes down. He knows what time of day it is. He knows what he might see. And he goes anyway. You hear a lesson for our moral lives? You don't walk into temptation. You don't walk where you know there might be that pornography access or whatever else the temptation may be. But David dared to go where he shouldn't have gone. There's this unwritten rule. Don't go on the roof at the time of evening. It's the regular time for bathing. To go on the roof is to invite temptation. Now, what was David's purpose? Did he know about that woman down there? Was he stalking her? No. Because the text says, now when evening came, David rose from bed, and he walked around. And those of you that remember your Hebrew, this is the Hithpalel. He is strolling around on the roof. He's out for his evening stroll. Look at some fresh air here. He wasn't overtly trying to stalk someone, but he was on the roof at the wrong time of day. Not a plot. Chance circumstances, not stuff. But you notice where he finds himself? He's on the roof of his palace, and all of his subjects are down below. He is in the position of a despot, standing and looking to survey whom he may please to see. That's dangerous. Invading the privacy of his citizens below. That's the position he put himself in. We as men are given influence. And we have the choice whether we will use our influence for good or we will take advantage of our influence to cross the line, to invade someone else's space, someone else's privacy, someone else's rights, because we have the power. Didn't get it. And it led him into trouble. Now here's the crucial point. What was Bathsheba doing bathing anyway at that time? Well, even if she were taking a normal bath, that would be the time she would take it. But the text actually tells us what she was doing. Verse 4, David sent messengers to fetch her. She came to him and lay with him. She had just purified herself after her period. And that is a parenthetical statement. Some versions translate it as if she purifies herself after she had sex with David. That's not what the Hebrew reads. The Hebrew reads, puts it in parentheses, because you need to know this fact, that she has just purified herself after her period. Why do you need to know that right there? Because that means if she's just purified herself, then she's not going to be pregnant with Uriah. You got it? So if she gets pregnant, it's not Uriah that's gotten her pregnant, it's David. That's why you need to know that fact, and that's why it's saved for this point. So you'll know that fact. And the time, according to the Levitical law, the time for cleansing after you've gotten over your period is in the evening, after you've finished your period. So she's doing what the law commanded her to do. In the place where she's supposed to do it, in the courtyard, where all the women took their baths. She's not provoking David through some sexual advance. Now, the identity of the bather. So David sent and inquired about the woman, and someone said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Now what should David have done when he heard that? Who's Uriah? Who's Eliam? Do you recall the story? Uriah, we know he's Uriah the Hittite. But what else do we know about Uriah? What do we know about Eliam? That's where you need to read the big story. And you find out that both Bathsheba's father, Eliam, and her husband, Uriah, were part of those 30 mighty men. David's trench buddies when he was fighting against the Philistines and fighting against Saul. Those were his closest buddies. His inner circle of friends. And he's daring to have sex with the wife of his good buddy. If that's not bad enough, Eliam was the son of David's personal counselor, Ahithophel. And so this makes David's sin all the more audacious and appalling. He took the wife, daughter, granddaughter of his close friends. That's the power of lust. That's the power of a temptation that comes suddenly upon us. Even your best friend, you're going to do it to your best friend. That didn't stop. We need to pause and think twice about God giving us the moral rectitude when temptation comes to stand firm against lust. And I want to share that in just a couple of minutes as to how I suggest we do that. Notice the accelerated tempo now. David sent messengers to, and the word actually means to fetch. He's summoning her. He's the king. And she is his subject. And there's no one in the palace. All Israel has gone to battle. And now he says, "You, to the palace." And so she obeys. That's the meaning of this Hebrew. He fetches her. Like you would fetch an animal. He summons her. He orders her to... What do you do if you don't obey a king's order? It's death. But I believe she's coming, accepting his order, not with any designs to try to make time with the king. None of that is in this narrative. So David sent messengers, and in the English it doesn't show up, but what it says in the Hebrew is he sent messengers and he took her. Not the messengers took her. He sent messengers and he fetched her through the messengers, of course. But it's showing that he was the one that was behind it all. So even the use of the language is narrowing the focus upon David. And you have to ask the question, in the story, as the narrator is describing the story, all Israel is gone. David is alone in the palace, according to the narrator's depiction. Who is there to protect her from the designs of the king? We are made to feel there is no one. This is the language of power rape. You ask the question, did she say yes or no? And my answer to that is, that's not the question. The question is, the king was in power. And his psychological, or did he do physical, we don't know, is what we call power rape in today's terminology. Psychological coercion by means of your power. Now, can I show that as in the rest of the story? Watch. Watch what the narrator does to make us sure that we're on the right track. So, Bathsheba's response, she returned to her house. The woman conceived. You know, she didn't try to stick around and lovey-dovey up with the king. She returned to her house. She conceived and she just sends back 2 words to him 9 months later. I pregnant. And that was like an atomic bomb that dropped upon David. He thought he had covered his tracks really well. And no, she's with child. Was there anything between them? Look how the story proceeds. After Uriah's death, it says she wailed and lamented with loud cries. These are special Hebrew words, not just for a perfunctory few crocodile tears because someone that you really didn't love anyway has died. These are words that are used for someone who has lost their love. She was still in love and faithful to her husband Uriah. And then this line clinches it for me. Again, you read it in the Hebrew. It's in the English, they just sort of water it down. They said David went and brought her to him. It's not the normal word for brought. It's the word that is translated elsewhere in the Bible, harvested. It's like she's a sack of grain that he goes and harvests, one more wife that he can pull into his harem. It's a word that implies the cold and calculating ruthlessness of a despot who now harvests his wife. Listen to the clues. And then, if you're still not sure, David's story is explicitly indicted by narrator when the narrator says at the end of this chapter that the thing that David, did it say that David and Bathsheba had done? The thing that David had done displeased the Lord. And then if you're still not sure, read the story of the parable that Nathan gives to David of this innocent ewe lamb and this ruthless tyrant that took advantage and took the one ewe lamb. Who's the tyrant in the narrative? David. And who's the innocent ewe lamb? Bathsheba. For God and for Nathan, it was very clear who was guilty and who was innocent. The victimizer is David. The lamb is the innocent victim, Bathsheba. And then you move on through history and you realize what kind of lady this was, Bathsheba. God chooses her to be the progenitor of the Davidic line. And you read a little further, you go to Matthew chapter 1, and you find that Bathsheba is one of those 4 women in the line of the Messiah. God chooses her to be the progenitor of the Messiah. Now, I have to say, I'm sorry that so many commentaries go a different direction, including our own Adventist Bible commentary. You go to the Adventist Bible commentary and it's filled with innuendos about Bathsheba. You go to the 19th century commentaries. I have read as many as I can find. I haven't found one 19th century commentary that affirms Bathsheba, except for one exception. Ellen White. She stands alone in a whole generation of male chauvinists. Ellen White always speaks of the sin of David toward Bathsheba, not with Bathsheba. Patriarchs and Prophets, David's sin toward Bathsheba. David had committed a grievous sin toward both Uriah and Bathsheba. The wrong to Bathsheba, and on it goes. She never varies from this. So, men, I suggest, in fact, I urge you to accept the conclusion. I think it's there in the narrative. The narrator represents an indictment directed solely against David and all men in positions of power, whether civil or ecclesiastical or academic or professional, who take advantage of their power and victimize women sexually. I take this as an indictment of myself. When I study this, since I've studied this, I've been much more careful about watching that I don't fall into traps and not get into situations that are dangerous situations. I'm thankful to say that David and Solomon, now that those two odd things have been straightened up, and I'm not going to spend long on this because I don't have much more time, but I just want to share with you, and if I have, where's Sean? Where are you, Sean? Is he here? Okay. I'm going to assume that some way we can get this PowerPoint to every member that's here tonight. Because what I want to share with you in the next 5 or 10 minutes is my own collection, what I call the 12-step plan for moral integrity. And these are passages that have meant things to me that have allowed me in times of temptation to stay firm. When I follow these principles, I find it can be pure in my mind. When I forget some of these principles, the old devil gets me. And so here they are. I'm just going to quickly go through them, and then you'll have all of these quotations, and you'll have all of these references. You don't need to write them down here, okay? So they'll be going way too fast for you to write them down. But these are basically built on the 12-step plan, but they're the biblical 12-step plan for moral freedom. Insights, and I could give you scores of tests everywhere else, but I've chosen just the passages from David and Solomon. They had their moral challenges. And as a result of their moral struggles, they give us counsel of how to avoid the problems that they faced. And so here they are. Number 1 is repentance and confession. Acknowledging and confessing one's own sinfulness and nature and acts and thoughts and motives in light of Christ's spotless purity, and deciding to follow the divine mandate for total moral freedom. And you remember this great passage from Psalm 51. David prays, "For I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight. Behold, you desire truth in the inward part and the hidden part. You make me to know wisdom." And secondly is to consecrate and surrender our will, our power of choice to God each day. To accept the divine heart transplant that Ezekiel 36 talks about when he says, "I'll give you a new heart. I'll give you a new spirit. Ask for that every day." Psalm 51:10 is, I love this one line from David's prayer. "Create in me," and that uses the same word bara that's found in Genesis 1. The same power that God uses to create the universe, he's wanting to use to create in us a clean heart and to renew his steadfast spirit within us. And I'm going to skip, I'll just read one for each one of these. But I can't skip this one. I say this often to God. Price Object Lessons 159. "Lord, take my heart, for I cannot give it. Keep it, it is thy property. Keep it pure, for I cannot keep it for you." I love that line. I can't do it myself. Save me in spite of myself, my weak, unchristlike self. Mold me, fashion me, raise me into a pure and holy atmosphere where the rich current of your love can flow through my soul. Isn't that a tremendous promise? Tremendous prayer. I urge you to pray it every day. Then meditate in communication. Meditate upon the character of God. We referred to this morning when we talked about Joshua. "I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand. I shall not be moved." And then right thinking. Training the mind to new habits of right thinking, to focus upon pure thoughts. And there are a number of passages. "As a man thinks in his heart, so is he." And from Proverbs, and another one from Proverbs 4. "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it spring the issues of life." But my favorite one is actually one that's from Job. I love this practical example from Job. "I've made a covenant with my eyes." And he says, "not to look lustfully at a girl." Now, the word in Hebrew is the hithpolel of the word being, which means to look, but the hithpolel is to look intensely, to look lustfully. You can't help but look at a woman, but don't look lustfully. And everyone knows where that difference is, or if you don't, you should. Go to a counselor and find out the difference. Prayer and claiming God's promises. We've talked about that this morning. Claiming the promises of God. And David did that. Psalm 32, Psalm 55, and Proverbs 2. Again, those passages that you'll get when I send you this handout. I like this one. This is my favorite promise about moral purity. Ezekiel 36. Then I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean. Notice who's doing all of this. And I will cleanse you. Not you cleansing yourself. I will cleanse you from all your filthiness and from all your idols. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you, and then this is the most potent line of all, and cause you to walk in my statutes. How many times have I tried to do it myself by lifting myself up on my bootstraps to realize I can't do it? But he says, just lay on the gurney, and every morning let me take you into surgery, and I'll do a heart transplant for you. And I'll give you that new heart. And I'll put my spirit and I'll cause you to walk my statutes. I'll give you both the will and the power. That's what he's promised. We get to claim those promises. And then the presence of the Holy Spirit. You know this text, do not cast me away from your presence. Do not take your Holy Spirit from me. The Holy Spirit will lead our mind upward to think on pure thoughts. And then the study of Scripture. We talked about this morning. Studying, memorizing, personalizing, internalizing the Word. How can a young man cleanse his way? Have you memorized this verse? By taking heed according to your Word. Your Word have I hidden in my heart that I might not sin against you. Number 9, God's presence. Cultivate a sense of God's presence. Where can I flee from your Spirit? I used to take that as scary. There's nowhere I can hide from God. Now I take it just the opposite. There's nowhere I can go that he's not there to help me. I can't ever get away from his presence of wanting to help me. He's the hound of heaven. You ever heard that poem? You know, that dog that you hear chasing you, you run faster and faster until you finally just fall down exhausted. And you look around and the dog licks you in the face. He just wanted to give you some love. You know, it's the hound of heaven. God's just there because he wants to hold you close. And then the great controversy. Visualize the reality of the cosmic conflict. There's a battle fighting. The battle is real between Christ and Satan and between Satan's angels and Christ's angels. And every time you hear the little whispering in your ear, come on, you can just do it one more time. It's okay. Listen to the other voice. The voice of the good angel, reminding you of the great controversy. And God wanting us to stay firm in the great controversy, to not follow the reality of the certainty of future judgment and the downward spiral. And then number 11, great controversy, visualize the reality. We've already talked about that. And number 11, this is my favorite one. The pleasure of pure thoughts. You ever thought about that? Listen to this verse. He who loves pureness of heart and has grace on his lips, the king shall be his friend. And listen to this quote from Ellen White. God has provided for everyone pleasure that may be enjoyed by rich and poor alike. What's that pleasure? The pleasure of cultivating pureness of thought. You thought of that as a great pleasure? And then finally, those of us who are married, intimacy with your spouse, cultivating and enjoying a wholesome personal relationship. Drinking water from your own cistern, let them be for yourself alone. Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. May her breast satisfy you at all times, and may you be intoxicated. Do we believe here in this church about getting drunk? We do. God says you can get drunk on your wife's love. And I think it doesn't get any better than that, so I'm going to end my talk with that. Engage life, in it to win it. Let's have a prayer together, shall we? Oh God, I thank you for the lives of David and Solomon. We thank you for the instruction that you give us, powerful instruction about how to live a pure life. We thank you also for recording even when they failed, because we so often fail you, God. Help us to realize there's still hope for us. You still love us, and you want to lift us up and bring us back to you. And so let the Davidson affair that we've described here this afternoon be our affair. May it ultimately turn into a love affair with you, the only source in which we can win. In Jesus' name, amen.